As the world population increases and the standard of living rises, there is a growing need for energy sources that introduce less carbon into the atmosphere. Photovoltaic materials are poised to supply the world with a green, sustainable source of energy, but there remain both technical and social challenges to its global implementation. The first modern solar cell was made at Bell Labs in 1954. In the next decade, solar arrays found their first application on spacecraft, and today they are rapidly growing as a preferred source of energy.
Now, to give a sense of scale, worldwide production in 2020 was enough to create 275 square miles of solar panels. This is the equivalent to about 90% of the area of New York City, or 50% of Los Angeles, and it's growing in excess of 20% per year.
The cost of PV has dropped by a factor of 300, while efficiency has steadily climbed. As a result, PV deployment has been growing exponentially at an average rate of 30% annually for decades. Today, the cost of electricity from solar energy is less than most conventional sources in many locations. As a result, about 30% of additions to the U.S. electrical generation over the 5 years come from PV. 5 states now derive over 10% of their electricity from the sun. The solar industry now employs about 300,000 people in the U.S., more than most other energy sources. Sustainability is a key aspect of PV.
Well, I think we're talking about sustainability because it really is about our human survival. It's about our ability to be on this planet and to survive for the long term. And I think as we've grown and sprawled across the earth and population has gotten bigger and we've realized there's no such thing as away places as we bump up against the places we would have thrown things away or water we polluted and now need to figure out how to drink. We're realizing that our human impacts come back to haunt us. And if we don't think about ways to start mimicking nature and realizing that everything is interconnected, we're not going to get to be here in the long run. And so we really do need to think about that and think about how to be what we call sustainable.
With further research in PV, energy integration, and energy storage, PV could provide 60% of the U.S. electricity needs by 2050. In fact, in the future, PV could provide most of our power, from transportation to heating, as well as bringing power to underserved and developing communities.
One of the major reasons that solar energy factors into sustainability is that it is a renewable energy source. It's literally the energy source that powers our entire planet. We get to be here because of this amazing relationship we have with the sun.
So, what materials do we need to harness the sun? In a word, silicon.
Crystalline silicon is a technology that is very durable in the field. It's reliable. We understand it. We have the supply chain we can leverage. We're ready to deploy. So none of this is a research or development challenge. This is a deployment challenge. This is a call to action.
In addition to bulk silicon, there's interest in using thin film technologies. National laboratories like NREL have been helping develop thin film technologies for years. With a thickness of less than 1/10 of a human hair, these materials promise low material costs and the potential for flexibility. The largest US-based PV manufacturer, First Solar, produces cadmium telluride solar cells. Coated glass enters the factory and is processed into a completed solar module in just 4.5 hours, with a very low carbon footprint.
But what I do see as a challenge for solar is a more political challenge. It's the challenge of status quo, first and foremost, that we're used to doing things with fossil energy, and we're used to having the convenience of things being exactly how we've always had them. And so shifting is hard. Making change is always hard.
So how do we affect change? One way is to make change more affordable. But how do we do that? One approach is new materials. Copper indium gallium selenide, CIGS for short, is a promising new thin film material that can be deposited on glass for many applications. Another new type of PV material are perovskites. These materials exemplify how research results can be unexpected. In the past decade, perovskite solar cell efficiencies have increased from single digits to over 20%.
None of these technologies have been deployed at scale, and that is one of their issues. Give you an example, we globally have one cadmium telluride manufacturer with a nameplate capacity of just under 8 gigawatts. And if you compare this to over 200 gigawatts of silicon, you get the picture.
Shifting those political arenas, the regulations, the policies, so that we can make solar affordable and reasonable, and also educating our community. I mean, I can't tell you, here locally in Alachua County, we've had a lot of challenges with people being afraid of having solar in their backyard. I think of solar as one of the best neighbors you could possibly have. It's quiet, it provides renewable energy, and in Florida, we're seeing a lot of solar going into what was agricultural lands. And so there's competition with ag, which is a thing, but there's also opportunity to have both and to do things, really neat things like running sheep under solar or planting crops under solar, which could be really cool. But we have people that are genuinely afraid that solar is going to poison their water or is going to create electromagnetic fields that are dangerous for them. And so I think we also have a public perception challenge in such a divisive time in our culture where everything seems to be either or. There has to be, there's always we're at really opposite ends of the spectrum. Every time you have a conversation, it seems like we have the fors and the againsts. And I think it's the political challenge to get away from for and against or either or to both and to finding ways that we can find common ground and find new ways to implement these kinds of technologies.
Another technology you may have heard of is 3,5s, namely gallium arsenide or indium phosphide and the derivatives thereof. These are actually the devices that have the highest efficiencies, but they have a problem. You can't really scale them. Every effort that we have taken over the last couple of decades has proven elusive. We cannot scale them by area and volume, and their costs are high. And as such, that means we cannot use them in terrestrial PV, but these are the devices that are used for space applications. All right.
So 2 questions that are now commonly being asked are, isn't solar cheap enough? And aren't we near the efficiency limits of cells, so how can we make them any cheaper? The answer to both of these questions is no. Products can always be made cheaper through additional development. The key is what's cheap enough. And cheap enough is when there is no benefit for going cheaper. This means at some point, if you were to make the product less expensive, if nobody's going to buy it, that's cheap enough.
Within communities, I talked about scale. I think it really is like at lots of different scales, So we see really innovative projects that when you have a locally owned utility, for example, like a Clay Electric or a GRU, where it's either cooperatively owned or it's owned by our local governments, they get the opportunity to do really unique and creative projects, like doing a feed-in tariff, where if you put solar on your roof, you have to tie to the grid, but then you get basically paid for that solar, so you become almost like a little utility in and of yourself. I think at the bigger level, it takes a real commitment from government to understand that bigger shift that it's going to take. And it takes the land base. Where do we put the solar? And I think those are the questions that really I think we're wrestling with here locally right now. We don't have enough rooftops, and the rooftops we do have weren't built or constructed to be able to hold that kind of weight or that kind of energy. And so as technology advances and we get more thin film solar and things like that, I think the adoption will happen more rapidly.
So, if we increase the efficiency, we can solve some of these problems. But how do we make PV more efficient?
The efficiency of cells are nearing its physical limit. So what can we do? Well, we can't violate the laws of physics, but we can analyze the context of the physical limit, the Shockley-Queisser limit, for example. That limit is based on the collection of the solar spectrum for a single junction cell. Well, multi-junction cells can, of course, go past this limit because now you have multiple cells trying to collect the same spectrum and be more efficient about it.
As leaders of tomorrow, I guess I hope you think about the fact that while things may seem really simple and you might have a really good idea, it's important to remember that there are unintended consequences to every decision that you make. And that it's really important to think, not just if you're focusing on the engineering, to then kind of take your blinders off for a minute and think about the people, or think about the environment and think about ecology. Or if you're an ecologist, to take off your blinders for a minute and think about ecology, and to try to see the world from another person's perspective so that you can begin to understand the complex culture, society, politics, economics that you're working in, and realize that in order to have a successful project and a truly sustainable project, it really has to fit all of those criteria, not just one.
As research drives energy storage and solar costs down, solar energy can provide low-cost, clean energy as long as the sun shines on Earth.